These are the instructions for Distance Learning Module 9, Day 4, Thursday, June 4th. Very important that you watch this video because I will be going over some of the diagrams and illustrations that you'll see in the check-in that I think students find confusing. But once I go over it with the kids, they generally get the idea. So very, very important to watch this. This is an Edulastic. This, I guess you could call it a quiz, if that's what you want to call it. It is a check-in for information based on what we started in week 7. So for your reference, in terms of review, you want to just look at your work from week 7, which begins with the cell size lab, and then moving into mitosis and just a very little of meiosis. Do not expect to see on here any of the meiosis material. It's all going to be based on mitosis, all right? So you're just moving into meiosis as a foundation for understanding Punnett squares. So generally, I do not check in on things right up to that day. I usually give the students, material prior to, flexibility to prepare and so forth. But these 3 activities that we did here, especially these 2, the comparison is good, but you don't need to know about meiosis. What do you need to know about meiosis instead of the stages is what is the purpose of meiosis. That's something you should know, that it's the purpose for making sex cells, gametes. But the actual steps of meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 are not necessary. I would say it is probably worthwhile paying attention to the difference in metaphase between the 2, just because that might help with some of your understanding in some of the other questions. So, okay, so let's get to it. It's an Edulastic. Of course, you're going to log in. You're going to see something slightly different. This is the check-in right here. And let's preview. Okay, so this one in particular, the issue here is understanding what the diagram means. So on the left-hand side where it says cell type, those are just random names. We could call them whatever we want. We could call them Jim, Bill, and Sue if we'd like. What is important here is that you understand what the numbers mean and these letters. And these letters are the stages in the cell cycle. Remember, growth 1, synthesis, growth 2, mitosis. And these numbers represent the time in minutes that are spent in each of those stages. So just to kind of help you along with the first question, this one here is basically asking you, and I'll use a really good analogy here. You're a teacher and I'm a teacher, and we're both going into the copy room. And I'm in there for 24 minutes, and you're in there for 48 minutes. What would be the logical reason why you spent more or less time than I did in the copy room? That's really what this question is asking. So based on that logic, which of these makes the most sense? So what you really, from a science perspective, okay, because my analogy is about copying paper, from this perspective, you would have to know where is it that cells prepare for mitosis, where one of these statements might be true to explain these numbers. I'm trying to be cryptic without giving the answer. Okay, so this is another diagram that students have difficulty with. First of all, this is cyclical. In other words, it simply repeats. So this second half of the diagram is just a distraction, right? So you could basically just put those Roman numerals back there again. If you don't know Roman numerals, just say you do know 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the numerals just represent numbers. On the y-axis, it's the amount of DNA. So this is, if we look at this just from the y-axis, we're talking about no change in the amount of DNA, an increase in the amount of DNA, a period of no change after the increase, and then a period of a decrease, and then no change, and then an increase, and so forth. So if I think about a cell, and I think about the nucleus, and I think about DNA, and then more DNA, and then there's a little more DNA for a little while, because that's what this seems to represent, and then there's less DNA. So it sounds to me like this on the x-axis probably represents time. So what this is doing is basically putting the cell cycle into a graph-like diagram. And so the question is asking you, which numeral on the graph best represents the process of mitosis? So you have to understand, what is it that happens in terms of amount of DNA in mitosis? You have to ask yourself, does it increase during mitosis? Does it decrease during mitosis? Or is there no change in mitosis? Because those are your only three options. Either there's no change, either there's an increase, or there's a decrease. That's it. Those are your only options. So you either have to pick one of these. So which one represents what happens to DNA during the stage of mitosis? I can tell you that if you want to go back in the test to look at a diagram that's good to compare to, this diagram. This diagram is essentially the exact same information, except instead of representing it in a graph, it's representing it in this circle chart, so to speak. We got A, B, C, D. Okay. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D. It's the exact same information. It's just a different representation. So I thought it was really important that students, those are the biggest difference charts in there that I think you're probably going to want to take a look at. But my point is, I think having gone over that, that'll give you some clarification on those diagrams, which are ones that students generally struggle with. The diagram I just showed you is actually in the assessment twice. So, I forget how many questions there were, but right there's 3 or 4 questions that we basically touched on and just showed 2 diagrams. If there are any questions, please reach out. It is 19 points, so there are 19 questions then. I did allocate 75 minutes. Of course, if you go back to weeks 7 and 8, that'll give you the materials that you should be using as a reference to help you with this unit check-in. And then moving into tomorrow, just so everyone's aware, we'll be working on Punnett squares.